Welcome back, everyone, to the Halls of History. I am your host, Scott Hall. Time to talk about our last trivia question. To review, yesterday I talked about how on December 11th of this season, Justin Jefferson, who has been just tremendous and so much fun to watch, had a Vikings record-breaking day with 223 yards receiving against the Lions. It was the 199th time that a player has recorded 200 yards receiving in a game. And Jefferson is the 43rd different player to reach that milestone. Now, the question that I pose to you, who was the very first player to reach the 200-yard receiving milestone? Little hint, it's right above me over my left shoulder, if you can see that all right. The answer, Don Hutson of the Green Bay Packers. The date was October 18th, 1942. Hutson caught 13 passes for 209 yards and 2 scores in a 45-28 win over the Cleveland Rams. That's right, the Rams began their life in Cleveland before moving to the West Coast. Now, Hutson also kicked extra points for Green Bay, and he converted all 5 in the win. Hutson recorded 2 more 200-yard games in his career, with one in 1943 and one in 1944. Years ago, I was asked by a fellow WMUL member when I was in college, name is Chuck Batla, if I could pick any players from any time, who would I want at receiver? I said I wanted Jerry Rice, and then I named Don Hutson. He looked at me and said, "Really?" Now, Chuck knew who Don Hutson was. For my reasoning, I told him, I said, look, if you look at how players performed during their time in the league, there aren't that many that dominated at their position in their time like Hutson did in the 1930s and 40s. Rest in peace, Chuck. I really enjoyed our in-depth football conversations, and I do miss those. Now, Don Hutson, he ended up being one of the greatest players of all time. He was born in Pine Bluff, Arkansas, and as a child in Boy Scouts, now get this, he played with snakes. Hutson claims that is where he got his quickness and agility. You know, I spent a lot of time around strength and conditioning coaches during my years working with martial athletics, and I never saw a coach bring in snakes to work on quickness and agility. Now, I would be willing to bet, though, that some of those athletes may have never run faster, albeit probably right out of the room, if snakes were brought in. Now, Hutson was an all-around athlete. He played baseball and was an all-state performer in basketball, which basketball was actually his favorite sport. He only played football for just 1 year while at Pine Bluff. However, he was noticed in that short time. Now, Hutson then moved on to play football at Alabama. He was on one end, out there split out on the field, and the end on the other side for the Crimson Tide, future Hall of Fame coach Bear Bryant. With Hutson and Bryant both split out, Alabama went undefeated in 1934, winning the national championship. Now, in Hutson's final game with Alabama that season, he scored on 2 touchdowns of 54 and 59 yards in the Rose Bowl against Stanford. The All-American was a fleet and fluid runner with great hands, and Packers head coach Curly Lambeau brought the Alabama Antelope north. Lambeau was trying to spread his offense out, much in the same way that a few colleges, including Alabama, were doing, and you could clearly see the success. Remember, at this time, football was still mainly 3 yards in a cloud of dust. The biggest stars at the time were backs, like Jim Thorpe, Red Grange, Ernie Nevers, Cliff Battles, and Bronco Nagurski. The football did not quite look like this one here. It was actually a little fatter and not quite as easy to throw. Now, Hutson, he graduated from college in 1935 and then, of course, entered the league after that. Now, the draft didn't begin until 1936. Now, so here's another fun note about how Hutson and how players then could sign with whoever they wanted. Hutson not only signed a pro contract with the Packers, but he also signed with the Brooklyn Dodgers. Yes, the NFL had a Brooklyn Dodgers franchise that existed from 1930 to 1943, then renamed the Tigers in 1944 before folding. So with both contracts reaching the NFL office at the same time, Joe Carr, who was the president of the NFL, awarded Hutson to the Packers because the contract had an earlier signing date. Just imagine that. And also imagine how things may have been different for the Dodgers if Hutson had been sent there. However, Hutson did say he chose the Packers because they offered him more money. Go figure. Hey, you've got the opportunity, right? Now, I'm going to read you a little excerpt from this book, America's Game, The NFL at 100, by Jerry Rice and Randy O. Williams. This is actually a very fantastic book. But this is from the chapter called Taking Flight, and it's a little bit about Don Hutson and a little story on him as he entered the league. The tall, skinny wide receiver paced nervously back and forth in the Green Bay locker room before playing his first game in the NFL. Rubbing his queasy stomach, the rookie admitted to a veteran sitting on the bench that he was scared to death about going out there and facing opponents who were much bigger and faster than he faced in college. The vet looked up from tying his cleats and with an easy grin assured him everything would work out fine. With the first pass thrown his way, the rookie hauled in Arnie Herber's nice high arcing throw in full stride past midfield. He raced toward the goal line untouched. His first play as a professional was an 83-yard touchdown pass. It was the only touchdown of the day as Green Bay knocked off its rivals, the Chicago Bears, 7-0. As they walked off the field after the game, that same vet slapped the young man on the back, smiled, and said, "What was there to worry about, kid?" Now, another quick little note about George Halas, who definitely had to play Don Hutson a lot. This is what he famously quipped one time about Hutson. "I just concede Hutson 2 touchdowns a game, and then I hope we can score more." Boy, if that doesn't show you that NFL defenses, they weren't ready for what Hutson brought to the field. As he and quarterback Arnie Herber, they were a perfect match for Coach Lambeau. Herber also resides in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, member of the class of 1966. Now, for those of us, me included, we are so used to seeing the football flying all over the field all game long. Quarterbacks with 30, 40, 50, 60 pass attempts, it feels like. So many receivers with 100 catches and over 1,000 yards in a season. So here is another history lesson that will just show how dominant Hutson was and how he changed the game. Hutson's first season in the league in 1935, he tallied 18 catches for 420 yards and 6 scores. The 18 catches, 6th in the league. Todd Goodwin of the Giants led with 26. Hutson's 420 yards was 3rd. Charlie Malone of Boston led with 433. Now, his 6 touchdowns did tie for the league lead with Bill Carr of the Bears. Some pretty low numbers, right? Well, Hutson went on to lead the league in receptions 8 times, including 5 straight to end his career. No one else has done that. 7 times he led in receiving yards, and 9 times in his 11 seasons, Hutson led in receiving touchdowns. In 1939, he led the league with what was a new record 846 yards, finishing almost 300 yards ahead of the next player, Perry Schwartz, who had 550 for Brooklyn. Now, here's something a little more eye-popping for you to show his dominance and how he changed the game. I know that is a theme rolling here. In 1942, Hutson did what no one had ever done before. He finished the season with a record 74 receptions, which shattered the previous mark of 58, set by Don Looney of the Eagles in 1940, and Hutson tied that in 1941. But then he ran up 1,211 yards. He was the first player in NFL history with over 1,000 receiving yards in a season. The previous record, of course, was Hutson's 846 in 1939. And finally, he caught a league record 17 touchdowns. Not even too many players today do that. The old mark of 12 by Hutson in 1941. Don Hutson was the first player in NFL history, again, this all coming in one season, with over 70 catches, over 1,000 yards, and more than 15 touchdowns. And he did it in just 11 games. He averaged over 110 yards a game, 6.7 receptions, and 1.55 touchdowns per contest. Now, if you put those numbers to current times in a 17-game season, you get 114 catches, for 1,871 yards and 26 scores. It's one heck of a year. Now, Hutson finished that amazing career with 488 catches for 7,991 yards, averaging over 16 yards a catch, and an incredible 99 touchdowns. Now, think about this. Hutson caught a touchdown pass every 4.93 receptions. Not even the greatest touchdown scorer of all time, Jerry Rice, did that. Rice caught 1,549 passes and 197 touchdowns, averaging a scoring catch every 7.86 grabs. So let's change the numbers here. If Rice had scored with the same average as Hutson, Rice would have tallied 314 touchdowns. Unbelievable. But that was how dominant Hutson was and how much he changed the split end, now wide receiver position, and how the game was played as well. Teams began to go after athletes that could be split out wide, outrun the defenders, and of course, you've got to find a quarterback that can get them the ball. Now, I know I've been throwing a lot of numbers at you, but here are a few more that, of course, got to blow your mind about Hutson. When he retired in 1945, those 488 receptions were the most all time. Second place, Jim Benton with 190. Benton played 2 more seasons and finished with 288. Hutson's career mark of the 7,991 yards, of course, was also first place. And in second place, Jim Benton yet again, 3,309, which after 2 more years improved to 4,801. Hutson's 99 touchdowns, forget about it. Second belonged to former teammate Johnny Blood McNally with 36. Hutson remained the NFL's all-time leader in receptions until Billy Houghton finally passed him on October 27, 1963, while playing for the Dallas Cowboys. And earlier in the season, on September 29th, Houghton also passed Hutson's career receiving yards record. So now, Hutson had lost 2 all-time career marks in 1963. However, no one touched his touchdowns record until Steve Largent finally tallied his 100th on December 10th, 1989, 44 years after Hutson had retired. And remember, at the time that Hutson was in the league, players were also playing on both sides of the field, offense, defense, and a lot of times also special teams. So on defense, as a defensive back, Hutson finished his career with 30 interceptions. He led the league with 6 in 1940, and in return yards with 197 in 1943. I mentioned earlier that he also kicked. Well, Hutson hit 172 of 183 extra point attempts and also hit 7 field goals. When it comes to scoring points, Hutson finished his career with 105 total touchdowns and 825 points. He remained the all-time leading scorer until Lou the Toe Groza, a kicker, passed him in 1957. The Green Bay Packers had great success with Hutson on the field, winning 3 championships, 1936, 39, and 44. He was a 2-time MVP and an 8-time first-team All-Pro. Hutson was named to the 1930s All-Decade Team, and anniversary teams, forget about it. The 50th All-Time Team, the 75th Anniversary, the 100th Anniversary All-Time Team, all member. He was also a charter member of both the College Football Hall of Fame in 1951 and the Pro Football Hall of Fame in 1963. Now, before Hutson, and even during his time, and for some even after that, throwing the ball was only done out of desperation. That wasn't seen as true football. The game was strength in the trenches and the runner taking off, whether it was the halfback, fullback, or even the quarterback running with the ball. Remember how I said earlier that the biggest stars at the time were all running backs. But with a player like Hutson, how do you defend that speed, the leaping ability, and those hands? He changed the game. If I was able to go back in time and watch past players, Don Hutson would be one of my first choices. And that first ever 200-yard game in 1942, that would be high on my list. Tune in Monday for another trivia question to get the week started, as this will be about an all-time leader who was an undrafted player and not undrafted like how Hutson was coming into the league before the draft began. And you can find that only right here on the Halls of History. Thanks for watching. Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays, everyone.